What is up, guys? Welcome back to the Kick-Ass Podcast. I hope you have had a fantastic week. We are not going to waste too much time today. We're going to get right into the show itself. But as always, I appreciate you guys for checking out the pod and giving it a listen. You can follow us on Twitter at @KickAssPodcast_ and me on Twitter personally at ASHMANNS. Can follow the show on TikTok as well at Kick-Ass Podcast on there too if you so choose. But yeah, like I said, we're not going to waste too much time. We're going to get into it pretty quickly here today. We have a nice little assortment of news to kind of get into, and then we'll end up with the nice little review of AEW and the pretty stellar turn that we got on Dynamite this past week. So that's why I don't want to waste too much time, and like I said, we'll just get it right into it. On the last show that we had, we, of course, addressed the latest installment of the investigations from the WWE Board of Directors into Vince McMahon and John Laurinaitis and whoever else may stem from this investigation. But there was another installment regarding at least $5 million that was found in payments. Of course, sadly, right now, whenever there's a lump sum found like that, we assume that there may have been another woman that was involved, another NDA, something of that nature. It turns out this payment may have actually been something completely different, which is actually so kind of ironic when you just think back on everything, in the history of Vince and everything, which we're not going to get into right now, but there have been reports stating that the $5 million actually went to the Donald J. Trump Foundation, which I chuckle because before I read the actual report here, because whenever I think of them two, like in the same sentence, I think back to the ridiculous WrestleMania match that we had with Umaga representing Vince McMahon and Bobby Lashley representing Donald Trump in the hair versus hair match. It's just... WrestleMania 23, I believe that was. It's just insane to think about, and to think of everything that's happened since then. Donald Trump has since been our president of the United States here. Yeah, it's just fucking crazy, dude. It's just crazy. Life is just, it's insane. But I will read the report here. And I'm reading this transcription from the Sportster, so shout out to them for the transcription here. But they reported that, quote, WWE reportedly spent $5 million on the Donald J. Trump Foundation between 2007 and 2009, as reported by Brandon Thurston of WrestleNomics, citing the company's IRS filings. Their payments are attributed to WWE and the address of the company's headquarters at the time, but no individual is identified as the source of the funds. They continue to state, quote, according to the IRS filings, WWE spent a total of exactly $5 million in contributions to the Donald J. Trump Foundation in the same 2 years, 2007 and 2009, end quote. His report reads, the records indicate the contributions came from WWE and used its headquarters address with no specific person named. The latest year-old comments from WWE's media relations attributed the donations to Vince McMahon and his wife Linda McMahon personally. It goes on to state, WWE stated in their Tuesday filing that these payments were unrelated to the company's internal investigations into Vince McMahon. So that kind of closes any speculations, at least on this particular payment, that it's not related into all the other non-disclosure agreements. They do go on to make a couple little interesting points here, which is kind of my second and third thoughts, so that's why I decided to go with the Sportster's article here. But they continue stating, quote, it's interesting that Donald Trump appeared for the promotion during the alleged period of payments. In 2007, he, quote, purchased the company with the assistance of Bobby Lashley in a match against Vince. I was about to say Vince McMahon, but they just said Vince, who was represented by Umaga, and again in 2009, he essentially acquired the corporation, and they put in parentheses, kayfabe, of course. And then they continue with saying why WWE may have decided to go through the Trump Foundation. It's possible that WWE's decision to pay for Trump's appearances through the Trump Foundation was made as a tax avoidance strategy. Moreover, the paper trail was only uncovered a day after the FBI searched Trump's Miami house. Donald Trump's last appearance for WWE was at the 2013 Hall of Fame induction ceremony, where he was entered into the Hall's celebrity wing. However, since he was elected as the 45th President of the United States, there have been numerous requests to have him removed due to his divisive views. So that's where their article ends there. And again, they, of course, reference Donald Trump becoming the 45th President. And it's not surprising, rather. If you're a business, just kind of even backtracking before we get into that, like, if you're a business and you're, or a corporation, or you have especially millions of dollars, like, these people aren't idiots, right? Like, they obviously have millions of dollars for a reason, because they're successful in many different avenues. I'll just leave it at that, right? But yeah, of course they're gonna do it and make a quote payment through the foundation, right? It's a tax write-off for WWE, and it benefits Donald Trump as well. So I mean, it doesn't even matter who it is, right? Whoever the receiving party is. So it's not really surprising to me. To me it was just, I guess, just surprising in the sense that it wasn't another situation with another female talent or employee or anything like that. It was just the, I guess, relationship that they had back in 2007 and 2009. But it also is interesting because Linda McMahon, when Donald Trump was elected as the President of the United States for us here in the U.S., which I'm not going to get into, but Linda McMahon was part of his administration as well, I believe, for the small business portion. So it's just pretty interesting how everything always just kind of ties back, and like wherever there's money, money talks, and there's always a money trail and shit like that. So it's just really interesting to me how everything always ties back and how everything ends up coming to light, like I mentioned before. So yeah, I mean, at least this one doesn't have too much of a negative connotation, in the sense that it doesn't involve a female in this situation. And like I said, another non-disclosure agreement. So, it is what it is. But I just kind of wanted to kind of circle back and kind of close that story, since we obviously brought it up on the last show here. And it is big news. Anything that comes out of this investigation should be addressed. It is interesting, though, that it looks like it stemmed out of the Miami raid that they had, or the raid in Miami, rather, from Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago mansion, essentially, that he has here in Florida. So, I mean, yeah, it is what it is. Nothing too much more from that. And I guess if anything else stems from this particular development of the story, we'll obviously address it at that point. But just another interesting little tidbit, and just more and more information that we get from this investigation. It's just fascinating to think of where we're at in the wrestling world and how much has changed in 2022. And just thinking back, just this year alone, that much less a year ago, you know what I mean? So I can't wait for the end of the year to kind of do like a year in retro, you know what I mean, or some shit like that. And maybe we'll have a guest on to kind of take a look back at the major talking points coming out of the year and just how much the wrestling world has changed. But this is obviously going to probably top the cake, you know what I mean? I don't see what else could happen this year, knock on wood, that could probably trump this. No pun intended there either. But moving on, guys. Moving on to the portion where it's going to pretty much be return heavy for the next couple of topics that we have here. But nonetheless, the biggest one right now that's rumored to be coming back, besides Sasha and Naomi, at least because, technically they're still employed with WWE, so it's just a matter of renegotiating the contract, but we don't have anything new as of late regarding those two ladies. But we do have more news and possibly an update on the heavily rumored return of Bray Wyatt. And obviously, if you guys know me, you know I'm a big Bray Wyatt fan. I pretty much have already gone into detail about that, so I'm not going to beat that horse again here today. But there was a development apparently from Fightful Select. Fightful, the Select portion, I believe, is their subscription portion of their website. So if you guys are inclined, I would definitely recommend checking them out. They have always seemed to have, reputable news and shit like that. So definitely check those guys out over there. But with that being said, they also got backing from Wade Keller at PW Torch, and I'm sure if you guys are listening to this podcast, you guys have heard of Wade Keller and PW Torch. They are in my podcast lineup as well. So shout out to those guys over there and everyone on the staff. They do tremendous work. But Wade Keller has essentially backed up Fightful Select's reporting as well. So the article that I'm reading from right now is whatculture.com. So shout out to those guys for the transcription here. But they pretty much kind of just essentially solidified what those two reports were stating as well. They said, quote, backing up an initial report from Fightful Select, Wade Keller PW Torch has stated how Bray is likely back in WWE soon. That Fightful story said that Wyatt's name had come up in an internal discussion, although Keller has gone slightly further than that by indicating that a little bit of a typo, that not just is the Eater of Worlds return a possibility, it's now a likelihood. Maybe not, maybe my brain is just screwed, whatever. It was previously stated how several members of the WWE roster were prepared to go to bat for Wyatt where it pertains to him being, that's just kind of worded weirdly, sorry guys, where it pertains to him being it is a typo, okay, being brought back into the fold, although the belief now is that these wrestlers no longer need to do that. Under the creative stewardship of Triple H, it's now said to be a, quote, clean slate for all where it pertains to current and former WWE talent. And that's at stake too. I mean, my brain just has a weird thing for typos or just like weird grammar shit. Not saying I'm perfect, but me and Matt at WWE podcast show, shout out to him, have talked about this in the past, but moving on, they continue to say, having been in the WWE system since 2009, the Eater of Worlds was somewhat surprisingly let go by the company on July 31st of 2021. Since then, Wyatt has stayed away from the wrestling business, bar a handful of convention appearances. During that time, the three-time world champion has also been working on a horror movie project with special effects artist Jason Baker. So yeah, pretty much almost a given at this point that Wyatt is set to return, and I'm super excited about that. I'm really, really intrigued to see whether he would return as The Fiend, Bray Wyatt, or if he's going to return as something completely different. And if this is even true, you know what I mean? Like, there a lot of, I'm not one, take that back, not a lot, but, there have been times in the past where reporters have gotten shit wrong, but it's just too much lining up and too many things and too many good reasons for him not to return at this point, unless it's something personal, or if he's just done with wrestling or he's just happy with what he's doing right now, then, to each their own, and kudos to him and happy for him. But if he's looking to come back to wrestling and WWE specifically, I mean, what better time than now? And there's a lot of different avenues and different ways you can bring him back. Someone else had pointed out, and I'm blanking on where I first heard it at, but someone had mentioned that we're obviously approaching 2 years for the return of Roman Reigns and his actual Universal Championship reign, and I had completely forgotten, but the individual that he defeated to become champion was The Fiend, Bray Wyatt. So, possibility that once Roman Reigns retains, say that 3 times fast, at Clash at the Castle, possibly could we get a return of The Fiend? Man, just like, and depending on, I'm not sure exactly where they're having, where they're going to be at in like the arena or the stadium or whatever it's going to be, but if it's an open arena type thing or whatever, like I hope it's at least like a big stadium, right? And I'm sure it is, because I think they said like 60,000 seats that they were preparing for, if I'm not conflating two stories, but I think that should be right. Regardless, I'm sure it's going to be a big setting and a big stage, but just the theatrics alone and just seeing that entrance and just seeing The Fiend, it will just take him coming back in this incarnation, right? In this version of Bray Wyatt. Just seeing the visual alone of him returning, I think it would just be so dope and just so, I don't even know the word, just right? Like just so fitting and just so proper, and it's just so, it's just, that's the pageantry of WWE and the pomp and circumstance, like Cody Rhodes has mentioned in the past, right? Like that's what, especially from WWE, like that's what you kind of live for. For me, like I'm a big entrance person, probably why I'm such a big fan of like your Karrion Kross, for instance, while a lot of people shit on him, like, and for his in-ring stuff and a lot of people just like nitpick him, and I can understand where you're, I guess, coming from, but to me, like, I see the overall picture and it starts with the entrance, and that's why The Undertaker was always a favorite of mine as well. You hooked me from the beginning, right? So automatically I'm hooked from the jump when we hear the opening note of the music, right? And then you hear or you see the entrance video, you see the whether it's the fog, the smoke, the pyro, whatever it is, it's just everything about it. I'm such a entrance fan, right? So for me, that's the number one thing that I instantly thought of if we're gonna go under that scenario, because the idea was that if Bray is set to return, that possibly he could come back to square off against Roman and to be Roman's next competitor and next challenger going up whatever the next pay-per-view is going to be, or PLE rather. And look, I'm not advocating for Bray to even win the title, but that's just another layer and another challenger that you have waiting for Roman, right? And then you already have Karrion Kross there, so there's just a lot of we're just adding depth, right, to the roster. So I think that's a cool possibility. And again, that's just speculation and just going off of rumors at this point. We could be way ahead of ourselves. You know, Bray still may not want to return, or there may not be interest on whatever side, you know what I mean? So we could just be grabbing at straws, or we could be predicting the future. I'm hoping for the latter, obviously, but it's exciting times, you know, and with the addition of Triple H in this position and just the new regime going forward, it's just exciting, you know, even if this doesn't happen as immediate as the Clash of the Castle, just the thought and just the possibility and the opportunity to sit here and speculate on people coming back, right, and you being excited for WWE and just their programming and what's going to happen next on Raw and SmackDown. It's a cool time to be a wrestling fan. So just definitely obviously wanted to touch on that as well, because if Bray does return, I think that would be almost perfect in an ideal setup. And you can even have, because then after that you're going to have so many questions too. What does that mean for Karrion Kross? Is he going to get pushed down the way? You know he's not going to stand for that. So what is the feud between him and Bray going to look like? Is that going to be the thing where him and Bray have to battle it out first to even get the opportunity to face off against Reigns? So there's just so many things, you know, and what does that even look like? What does Bray look like when he returns? Is he going to be the Fiend? There's just, again, like 1,000 different questions, right? But that's the fun part about it. So hopefully that is the case. But like I said, that was reported apparently by Fightful Select. Sorry, my dog just is. I rearranged my room. Side note for you guys. Not that any of you guys care, but my dog loves being able to look out of the window now, so she's just fascinated by it. But moving on, in the return side of things, and especially with this past SmackDown, we'll start off with finishing off with Karrion Kross. He didn't do too much on this past SmackDown. He had a backstage promo segment pretty much addressing why he's back, you know, and how he was essentially wronged, and he called Roman and Drew the chosen ones, and pretty much said that he was like the broken toy who was just outcasted and just cast aside, and pretty much just he was made, you know, like he was made to feel like he wasn't wanted and that he wasn't good enough, and now he's back, and we all know the bloodline, but now he's going to show us the timeline going forward. And it was a really cool promo, right? And it was essentially like ideal and what you would do for a Kross character. But I loved how they ended it with him kind of peering around the corner, and they showed Drew McIntyre in the far shot towards the back, and Drew's music hit, and it was just pretty much like Drew warming up before he was set to go out for his segment. So it was just a really cool blending of two segments at that point, and I just love the little things and the little changes that we're getting. But that did lead on to Drew, I believe it was a promo segment that he was doing, and then the Usos ended up coming out and confronting him. Scarlett ended up coming out after that, and Scarlett didn't get in the ring, but she got on the apron and pretty much told the Usos to take a message back to Roman Reigns, and Reigns will be on SmackDown next week. I believe they're in Quebec next week, or somewhere in Canada next week in Montreal, I'm pretty certain, which is gonna be a dope show. I love when they're in Canada, and I don't think they've been back to Canada since the pandemic has happened, if I'm not mistaken. So that's, regardless, it's gonna be a very fun show, and obviously, like I said, Reigns will be on that. So it'll be very cool to see what developments we get after next week's show, and especially with our honorary Uso, which I'll get into in a second. But there will be a lot for Roman to address, and hopefully he will. So yeah, I think next week's show, and again, another, not necessarily cliffhanger, but another reason to tune into the show next week, and another reason to be excited for it too. So with that being said, the honorary Uso that I'll touch on and close that portion of the SmackDown side of things, or at least before we get into the tag team division, was the honorary Uso, Sami Zayn. He did what he had to do. He sacrificed himself. He took the Claymore kick and pushed, I believe it was Jay, out of the way, which, and if I'm not mistaken, that pretty certain it was Jay. And that's a nice little, not Easter egg, but a nice little tie-in there, because Jay has been the one who's not as accepting of Sammy and not as trusting of Sammy, whereas Jimmy is not necessarily trusting Sammy, but he's more open to it, whereas Jay is just like, nah, dude, fuck you, like, and you're not blood, you know what I mean? Like, Jay ain't about it, you know? So I love that dynamic, and that's what I was saying earlier. Roman should, you know, just make logical sense, should address that as well, because obviously Drew McIntyre and Madcap Moss did end up picking up a tag team victory over the Usos as well, so it's going to be a busy night for the Bloodline, for the honorary Uso, and everyone involved in that, and I love how Roman has so many different, like, webs just stemming off of him, if you think about it. It's just growing and growing and growing, so I love it. I love the outlook, and I love the positivity and the good vibes that we have going forward. But sticking with the return vein, like I said, we had the return of Hit Row. The OG3 is what they call themselves, but they're still obviously going by Hit Row. Obviously, again, we would not have the return of Swerve Strickland because good old Swerve is in AEW as part of the tag team Swerve in Our Glory with Keith Lee. They're actually a tag team champion, so shout out to them. But it's cool. I'm glad Hit Row is back, and I'll actually get into here what Top Dollar said on Busted Open Radio. He kind of went back. I believe it was, gosh, when was this interview? Had to have been yesterday, yeah. So Top Dollar was on Busted Open and went over the return, so I'll read that here for you guys. But before I get into what Top Dollar said on the return, again, just another positive side, and I love the depth, and it's just another layer to the tag team division that we're adding to, and it's just, there's just so many possibilities with that. Immediately, if you feel like you need to replace Swerve, like, have, like, that one solo act within, you know, because you have your solo guy who was going to be Swerve, you have your female act and your manager, B-Fab, and then you have your tag team with Ashanti and Top Dollar. So if you don't want to have it just as a trio, I could see like a Carmelo Hayes from NXT being pulled up. I just think it'd be just a perfect addition. He just fits the part, right? Like he gives off that swag and that vibe, like, don't fuck with me, and just that cool, like, you know, like, cooler than everybody else type of vibe, right? So I think and that's exactly what Hit Row is. Like, they're cocky, but they have a reason to be cocky, you know, like, they have they back it up in the ring, and they back it up, you know, like, they're actual artists too, you know what I mean? So, like, it's not like they're just playing, like, rappers or whatever. Like, they do that shit in their real life, so it's just cool, you know what I mean? So I love the tie-in there, and that's why I feel like a Carmelo Hayes could fit in perfectly. So but I'm not even saying that that's necessary, but a lot of people have said, like, oh, it's not the same without Swerve and everything like that. I mean, ideally, yeah, you know, if Swerve wasn't in AEW, then it would be a no-brainer, but I like Swerve where he's at, and I'm kind of excited to see what the trio does going forward. But like I said, we'll get into what Top Dollar said here. He said, quote, when he gets the reins and is like, I want to bring my guys back, and he's referring to Triple H, we were one of his top priorities to get back because he knew what we could bring to the table. About a week and a half ago, he hit me up and was like, how are the rest of the guys? We're good. None of us wasted time this whole time. I was on tour. I did shows in New Orleans and Los Angeles for music, wrestled at GCW, MCW, ACW, B-Fab lives in Colombia, so she was doing her thing down there, modeling. Ashanti was doing stuff in Atlanta, acting stuff, LA, model stuff. We never stopped training and being ready. He was like, how fast can I act and get you guys here? This was Wednesday of last week. If you really want us, we can be there tomorrow. And this is, again, top dollar. He said, we ended up having a Zoom call with him, the three of us, and planned out what would happen the next couple of days. This week we got physicals and contracts. I don't know how the story broke that I was going to be there, but I knew it wasn't with somebody with all the information because they didn't know B-Fab was going to be there, which we played into. When me and Ashanti came through the curtain, you thought it was just going to be us, and we had B-Fab come out last. Yeah, she's here too. She's an important part of the group, he said. He continued by saying, it was a really cool process because Hunter, there are a million people Hunter could run back. The list is hundreds of people long that are talented performers that were released in the last 5 years that are still young and able to do these things. A million people he could bring back, but he called us. That made me feel not just special, but grateful. That's why I will sing his praises to the high heavens. Everyone in the world thinks they know who I am. Everyone in the world thinks I'm hard to work with. People who never worked with me had one conversation with me and felt that they could talk down to me like I'm not a 30-year-old man. Right on, man. Shout out to you, man. Top dollar. He continued on saying, I told them about themselves, and then they get in their buddies' ears like I'm hard to work with. In actuality, I'm not hard to work with. I'm hard to fool. You can't tell me something that you're not going to stand on. That's how I was raised. And then they go on to say that Mark Henry said that Top Dollar was easy to work with when he was there and they worked together. Following his release, it was reported that Dollar, quote, rubbed people the wrong way. So yeah, and that's why I wanted to kind of get his side of that as well, because people have mentioned the same thing about Bray Wyatt, and that's why, whether it was his price tag for Bray, a combination of his price tag and his quote bad attitude backstage, I think that's all subjective, right? And I again obviously wish I wasn't there, so I don't know what anyone who had reported either seeing or overhearing the bad attitude or what, like, it's just strange with that. For instance, like Hit Row, you know, like they had been in NXT. I'm granted not for too long, but like they were down there for a good amount of time, and there was never any reports of bad attitudes or anything like that. And then they get to the main roster, and all of a sudden they all there's a bad attitude, and then they're all released, right? Like it's just strange. Like B-Fab was released first, and then it was the remaining three guys were released, I think, the week later. Just so strange, you know. It's just. Look, and I think Triple H was even quoted from Top Dollar saying that he stated that he doesn't really know what happened in the past and he doesn't care. It's a new regime, it's a new environment. I'm sure he didn't say regime, but he pretty much said it was like a new environment and it's like a new team going forward and they're just looking forward and not looking back. So, again, just promising. I hate to keep repeating myself, but it's just that's what we as fans look forward or looking forward to rather, with the WWE side of things. So shout out to Hit Row. I'm super happy they're back. That's just more depth, like I said, in the tag team division. Whether you want to break these guys off eventually, have them go their singles route, not necessarily break up, but you know, just go for like the Intercontinental Gold if we're going to do a draft, which that has been reported to be up in the air and something that Triple H wants to do after the Clash at the Castle PLE. So we'll see, and I think obviously this would be perfect timing to do so. But we'll get into that if that does become a more solidified thing. But yeah, I'm just, me personally, happy Hit Row is back. I think it was foolish that they were let go. Not surprised AEW picked up Swerve Strickland when they did. But yeah, I'm not one of those people that are going to sit here and be like, oh, Hit Row is going to suck without Swerve, because that's not true at all. Each of those talents have a charisma and something about them, you know, something engaging and captivating about them, and especially B-Fab too. Like I love her being in the group, and I love that she was brought back as well. So just looking forward to them going forward too. But that will wrap up the WWE side of things, and we will get into the AEW Dynamite review, which definitely had some newsworthy moments to say the least. But we will get into the card here itself. AEW Dynamite opened up with the coffin match, which I think was a really good idea and a good decision to start the show with. But this match, it seemed like pretty much from the jump that these two dudes were bleeding, especially Brody King, man. Brody was just, there was a picture, I think, Mikey Ruckus posted on Twitter, so shout out to Mikey. He is their pretty much music guru at AEW. He creates the majority of their entrance themes. So so check him out if you guys haven't, rather. But he had posted this screen grab of Brody King's face, and when I saw that, it kind of gave me chills a little bit. I was like, man, like, I would not want to see that dude in, like, a dark alley. Like, man, like, you see that dude and you're like, man, like, this guy is one bad motherfucker. You know what I mean? Especially with the thick blood all over his face. Like, it was just, the visual is just something else. But at one point in the match, House of Black came out, and the numbers essentially started overwhelming Darby Allin. You kind of had a sense that Sting was going to make an appearance at some point. You just you weren't really sure at what point. Once House of Black came out, of course, they make their entrance with the lights going out. So you're like, okay, this would probably be like an ideal moment for Sting to kind of do something. And it was really cool. They had, I don't really know how, but it makes sense thinking back on it with how long the lights were out for. At one point towards the, later on in the match, rather, they had Buddy Matthews out there as well. He returned. Shout out Buddy. And dude's just fucking thick, man. Like, that guy is, like, people talk about, like, Pac and, like, his physical, just, like, presence and, like, his body. But, like, man, like, Buddy Matthews, like, his chest is just fucking unreal. Just so shout out to him and all the work that he's been doing in the gym. But there was a point where he was approaching the coffin, and to go get the coffin, you know, to help Brody King solidify the victory. And Sting was actually in the coffin itself, and it's pretty cool. Had the bat in there, all that good stuff. Sting ended up taking out Buddy Matthews, gave his baseball bat to Malachi Black, who was sitting in one of the corners of the ring. But Black kind of just looked at him and slowly walked out of the ring, and it was rather, and I loved how the bat landed too. So shout out to Sting there. When he kind of tossed it over to Malachi Black, who was sitting in the corner, it landed so perfectly just in his lap. It was just perfectly well done. But yeah, so Sting gave the bat over to Malachi Black, but Black walked away and Sting ended up chasing him away. Darby then just one of my favorite finishes to a match in some time. Like, it just really stood out to me. Darby, and if you guys remember, especially with, I think it was called the Royal Rampage, the way that Brody King had won, he was choking. He had a chokehold on Darby, drug him over the ring ropes rather, and was just holding him, choking him, and then just dropped him to the floor, obviously, you know, eliminating him from the Battle Royal. And that was the same way that they ended the match here. Darby was choking out Brody on the apron, dropped him, Brody fell to his feet into the casket, and the lid just slammed shut. It was just such a fluid motion and just so perfectly done. Like, I don't even know if you could do this as perfectly as they did 2 times in a row. So just shout out to all those guys. And just, if you haven't seen the match, like, I'd recommend checking out the match because it was just fun. But the ending was just so perfect. So shout out to them. After that, we had a promo segment from Moxley and Jericho individually hyping up the main event, which was cool. The Trios Championship tournament began next. We did have the Young Bucks, or the tournament rather, was broken down. So we'll see that we were shown rather that the Young Bucks and a mystery opponent will face off against Dragon Lee, Rush, and Andrade next week, which we'll kind of get into here in a little bit more, or a little bit later rather. The Tornado Tag match was up next, the Lucha Bros versus Andrade and Rush, and this match was everything that you would think it would be. The only gripe I think that I would maybe nitpick at was just the utilization of the mask again, of Penta's mask. I believe it was Andrade and Rush, maybe both of them, but I can't remember specifically who. But they had tied Penta's mask to the bottom rope, so pretty much forcing him in a situation where the only way that he could free himself from the rope to help his brother Rey Fenix was to unmask, right? So you could see anguish and really like torment on his face, as oddly as that sounds, on whether he was going to, demask and to help his brother or not, which he ended up doing. And ultimately, Alex Abrahantes, who is always ringside with him, his manager, had a backup mask and threw it in there. But it was intercepted by the tag team and by Andrade and Rouge, and they ended up throwing it out to the crowd. There's a fun moment where they threw the mask out into the crowd, and the crowd chanted to whoever caught it to throw it back. And they did not end up doing that. Whether I don't know if the fan who caught it was just like, fuck you guys, like, I'm keeping this myself. Which I don't blame you. If you're listening to this, and if you are, congrats. Or if they tried to and it just didn't make it back to the ring, which I doubt. But yeah, it was just kind of like a nice little throwback to where John Cena threw his his T-shirt into the ring back from One Night Stand 2006, and there was just no question. The fans threw his shirt right back to him. If you haven't seen the One Night Stands from 2005 and 2006, please stop what you're doing. Wouldn't be offended. Go watch those pay-per-views. Like, it's just a whole completely different world. And they speak for themselves. So please go see them. But yeah, this match was just fun, very fast paced. Exactly like what I said from the beginning, what you would expect from those guys. But was surprised the winners ended up being Andrade and Rouge by pinfall. I kind of thought that the Lucha Bros may get the victory here. Maybe I shouldn't be surprised with the push that Andrade has been getting lately, but I was just kind of taken aback maybe. But we did get a development kind of referencing what I was saying earlier with the Young Bucks and a mystery partner. We had a backstage segment where the Young Bucks were pretty much asking Hangman to be their partner for next week. The Young Bucks were apologizing for pretty much being dicks and assholes to, weird combination there of words, to Hangman the past year or so, or maybe even since AEW started, depending on how you look at things. And yeah, pretty much just asking for forgiveness from Hangman. And Hangman was like, look, you guys didn't congratulate me once I won the championship, but the Dark Order did. So he's going to fully support the Dark Order and be on their side. He said that he's not going to be involved in the team, and it's going to be a combination of the Dark Order themselves, but he's going to fully put his I guess, energy and support behind the Dark Order. And which was very interesting. But I liked it, you know. I liked that it wasn't just an immediate, okay, yeah, like, everything's good, you know. I like that there's more layers to this. The Young Bucks looked defeated. They were like, okay, yeah, man, we get it, you know, totally understand it. The ending of this little segment, like Brandon Cutler, who's always the one filming, he was like, I think he got, because, let me backtrack. Hangman had mentioned that, you know, you guys, essentially the third man for the Young Bucks should be someone who has always had their back, who they've always been aligned with. There's never been any question on their loyalties. So obviously it points to one man, which we'll get into here in a moment. Or you would think it would, but I'm going to kind of maybe throw another tidbit out there that hasn't really been addressed yet or really been kind of looked into too much, at least that I've come across yet. But I like that, and that's what I was getting to. And Brandon Cutler ended saying, guys, I think you're talking about me. Just little things that Brandon Cutler does. I think that it's just very, very well done. But I think, I mean, I'm not going to break any news here, guys. I think it's pretty obvious the third man we're all expecting and thinking it's going to be next week is Kenny Omega, right? Just makes sense. But the thing that what I was referencing, the thing that I'll kind of start on here is the last time that we saw Kenny Omega on Dynamite was after he lost the championship to Hangman, and he had made it a point to say that he hadn't gone back and watched the match back, but that Hangman was the better man in that situation, and pretty much gave him his props. But the Young Bucks had the opportunity to help Hangman retain the title, and they didn't. And there was a moment in that championship match where they could have helped and at least prevented Hangman from winning, and they didn't. So it would be very interesting to see how they kind of tie that into everything. Or they could just go on without even addressing it, but I don't think AEW is going to do that. But look, guys, I am so ready for Kenny Omega to come back. There's just a weird void, just like a weird presence that you can feel is missing. And I think maybe even more so since the anticipation has been building, since we know that, you know, it's like almost like any day now, or that's the assumption that we're all under at this point. But it's just like that feeling in the air that you can almost sense it, that he's about to return. With all the returns that we're getting back lately from injuries, it's such a good thing. But again, I think it's pretty obvious that Omega, like I said, is going to be the third man for the Young Bucks and the trios, which obviously makes sense. Tony Khan had made it a point in the past to say that he wasn't going to bring the trios titles out until Omega was ready, and it would only make sense. So yeah, the only thing I am kind of wondering about is who they're going to end up facing. My early projection, and hear me out, is it's going to be the Dark Order facing off against the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega, and which I know that would constitute the Dark Order beating House of Black, which I know is sacrilege. But with that, I just feel like I think there's a couple ways you could go with that. But you can either have a Miro come out and interfere in the match or at least cause a distraction and have the Dark Order pick up the victory to advance in the tournament and continue that story. You can have a variation of Sting or Darby Allin come out and do the same thing. Because you're going to need something for all three of those guys, Miro, Sting, and Darby Allin, you're going to need something for them to do it all out. You can't not have Miro on the pay-per-view, right? And especially Sting and Darby Allin if they're available. So I think that would be a nice little trio. So you could do Miro, Sting, Darby Allin versus the House of Black, because they're obviously going to want their vengeance for being cost the shot in the tournament. So that would be an easy way to have the House of Black not advance in the tournament, have Dark Order advance, and then have the finals being Dark Order versus Young Bucks and Omega. And if you even want to get some heat back from House of Black, you can have a Brody King take out one of the members of the Dark Order and have him completely injure him and have the whole thought and the possibility and the whole finals of the tournament in jeopardy. And then that's where you can have your uber babyface Hangman Page make the save and save the day and fill in for that third spot. So then you kind of get your culmination of the Dark Order and Hangman Page versus Young Bucks and Kenny Omega for the trios titles. And I just think obviously that'd be a kick-ass match, but you kind of get a resolution of so many stories coming out of that. And I think depending on how or whether you want to do the Young Bucks and Omega as heels or baby faces, I mean, you can't return or have Kenny Omega return rather and have him immediately be a bad guy. Like, people are going to want to cheer for him. So I think this is going to be one of those situations where you can have a face and face team once you're at the finals match at All Out. Maybe even have the Young Bucks play more of the heel side in Omega in the match itself, but at the end have them be the congratulatory baby faces, whether they end up winning or not. I'll save that prediction until we get closer to All Out itself. But that's just kind of my thought on how you can get there. I know that's probably way out of the box, but just kind of my early prediction, at least my early journey to get to All Out. Addressing the next title match that we had here on the show was the TBS Championship. Your, of course, TBS champion Jade Cargill defending against Madison Rayne. This was an okay match. I think it definitely could have gone one or two ways. But I'll give the women credit. They did a lot of you could tell the hard work that they put into it. And I think it was a good match. I think a lot of people were predicting it to be a disaster, and I think they were proven wrong. So shout out to the women involved here. But no surprise that Jade picked up the W and continues on. We did get news that Chris Statlander is going to be out for an undisclosed amount of time, battling another knee injury. So, positive vibes and thoughts to her. She just recently came back from another, I think it was the ACL injury that she had just finished, obviously rehabbing and going through. So that's such a bummer. She was literally just about to, in my opinion, she was gaining a lot of momentum and a lot of crowd support, and I think she could have been on the verge to be the first one to dethrone Jade and give her first L here in AEW, or ever really in wrestling, since she literally started her career here in AEW. So that sucks, and especially since it sounds like Chris Statlander is going to be out for a while. Obviously, we must wish her nothing but the best, but it just sucks. I think that would have been a good and a fun moment, and obviously a good match, rather. And it would have had a nice little story built up to it. But for time purposes, guys, we will move on to the main event, which, of course, was your AEW Interim World Championship match. Your champion is Jon Moxley, defending against former La Champion, Chris Jericho, or Le Champion. And he was rocking the Lionheart outfit, the Lionheart gear from back in 95, 96, ECW days. It was such a cool throwback. And not just ECW, but that was the earliest footage that I saw of the Lionheart days. But man, like, it was just, and shout out to Jericho too. I know I've given him his praise before, so I'm not gonna go in depth here. But dude just looks like, and I know he had a recent health scare, so that kind of like forced him to. But and a lot of people don't, like a lot of people don't. They'll go through a health scare and not really do much to change, or just say, it is what it is, or whatever their mindset is. But he did a complete 180, and you can obviously tell. But he did a like side-by-side photo comparison, obviously the same gear and everything, which I was hoping for. If you listen to the preview, I was hoping that he would rock the same, at least like the vest and the trunks, or not the trunks, but the tights and everything. And he did. Jericho just being Jericho, he pretty much nailed everything visually, appearance-wise, so kudos to him for that. But dude, like, just looked almost like himself from 25 years ago. So it's just insane. The match itself was pretty gruesome. I should have expected it being a Jon Moxley match, but there was a spot in the match pretty early on where Jericho essentially ripped the earring out of Jon Moxley's ear. Not really sure if he actually did. Probably not, right? But Moxley, I hate saying this, but because I feel weird just being like insidery, but Moxley essentially, like, they say he bladed from his ear, so I guess I would answer that question. But he was just bleeding nonstop, bro. Like, from the ear, he had a gash at the top of his head. That was my dog Callie in the background. Play no games around here, right? But yeah, the blood from Moxley was just gnarly, man. Like, the visual that is set up for after the match, which I will obviously get into, was just perfect. But the match itself was brutal, and I think it was very hard hitting. I wasn't expecting it to be so gruesome. But and the way that it ended, I was very surprised by as well. Moxley had actually ended up making Jericho bleed, which, before we get to the ending here, at one point too, there was an exposed turnbuckle. There was a spot where Sammy Guevara had came and he threw Floyd, what was it, Floyd or Lloyd? I couldn't remember last time either. The baseball bat, I'm pretty certain it was, to Jericho. It completely overshot, like, just completely missed the whole ring. So I'm sure Jericho wasn't too happy about that. And poor Aubrey Edwards had to just do everything she could to not see the interference going on. But, shit happens. It is what it is. But Moxley ended up making Jericho bleed by pretty much just knocking him face first into the exposed turnbuckle. That set up the eventual ending sequence with Moxley getting a submission victory with a rear naked choke on Chris Jericho, which I was very surprised by. I like the kind of tie-in there, though, because Lionheart Chris Jericho is more of a technical base, and it's pretty cool to see them in that match with a submission victory. But it's just not something that you would expect from Jericho, so shout out to him again for doing that. But the obvious main point, talking point out of Dynamite was the return and the happenings after the match itself. We got the return of none other than CM Punk, making his long-awaited and speculated return. There was, of course, a brawl going on between the Jericho Appreciation Society and the Blackpool Combat Club, with Eddie Kingston being out there and Ortiz. Out of nowhere, we hear the music for CM Punk, and he makes his way down to the ring, pretty much clears the ring, and then has the eventual face-off with Jon Moxley, which, again, like I was mentioning earlier with the earring, and the side of, like, the earring that they went with too, I'm not sure if that was specific. I'm thinking back with Jericho and Moxley, it probably was, because they're so detail oriented. But I love the visual of Moxley's just bloody whole side of his, like, face, his ear, just the whole side of him is just blood just dripping down him, right? And then you have the disheveled CM Punk, returning champion, like, just badass dude, like, right? The look in CM Punk's eyes was like he's here for, to prove something, right? And I just love before Moxley even got back to his feet, when he was still sitting on the ring, before he even turned around to make eye contact with CM Punk, he was looking around, he made eye contact with Claudio, who was ringside first. He was like, all right, man, here we go. Had his title. stood up, and then that's when he turned around and made eye contact with Punk, and then of course the fans lost their mind. They did a stare off, kind of looked at the fans really quick, kind of like reminiscent to the Hulk Hogan and Rock stare down from leading up to WrestleMania 18. I love the ending though, with the blood, obviously, like I had mentioned, but Mox being Mox, he flicked CM Punk off and just gave him the stiffest just shoulder bump and just like blew right through him and just like exited the ring, like dabbed it up with Claudia, who was out ringside, and just made their way back up the ramp and just ended his night. Just the force that he had just going through Punk was just amazing and just so Moxley like, right? So that pretty much solidifies the main event that we're going to get at All Out. We're going to get our interim AEW champion, Jon Moxley, facing off against our actual AEW world champion, CM Punk. We'll see if that has the makings for any type of MJF return, whether it be at All Out or the Dynamite after that, or if MJF is just really gone. But I myself am most certainly looking forward to the story building up to the main event match that we're going to get between Moxley and Punk at All Out. I really want to hear the promos and just the story that they're going to go with leading up to it. That's and of course the match is going to be stellar as well, but I'm just really looking forward to the story that these guys are going to tell. But thank you guys so much for listening to this extended show here. We went a little bit longer than I originally anticipated, but I appreciate you guys for listening to the show. And until next time, I hope you guys have a fantastic week. Take care.